You can have a seat.
Well, good morning, everybody. It is great to see you. My name is Adam Hawkey. I am one of the ministers here at CCC. And whether you are here all the time or if this is your very first Sunday, I'm really glad that we just get to spend some time together. You probably already know this, but school's about to kick back up. Baltimore County Public Schools, kids go back in 7 days. Teachers go back tomorrow. Don't shoot the messenger. I know some of us, you think I just said a bad word, and some of us are totally pumped about school getting started. I remember when I was in school, and I don't know if they still do this, but when I was in college, a lot of times the last class before a big test would be like a total review session. You know, the professor, the teacher wanted us to do really well, so they made sure we were connecting the dots and really understood the key concepts and all that type of thing. And so my first semester, freshman year, I rolled into this history class, and I was totally caught off guard when it was test day. And I remember saying to my buddy, like, what happened to the review class? And he's like, that was the last one. You skipped it. And I learned my lesson, because when I retook that class in the spring after I failed it, I never, ever missed review day again. And I say that because today is kind of like a review day. We have spent all summer diving into the life of Jacob. And before we move on, we just want to pull back from the individual pieces and moments that make up his life. We want to pull back and kind of take a look at the whole of his life, because there's a few things that we can learn from there. You know, sometimes we can get focused on all the pieces. Sometimes we can miss the forest for the trees. Today, I want to think about, what does Jacob's whole life teach us? What are some things that we just can't afford to miss when we consider the whole of his story? And when we look back at that and see about how it all connects, there's two really big ideas that kind of bubble to the surface, two big things to think about. And as we get rolling, you know, if you're new around here, or maybe you've been in and out over the summer, you've had some vacations, some weeks you haven't been around, let's just make sure we know enough of Jacob's story to know what we're talking about today. This guy's story, Jacob, it's found in the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, and it stretches across quite a few chapters. It starts in Genesis 25, and he's a main character for about 12 chapters. He is the grandson of Abraham. He is the son of Isaac, and he becomes a really important figure in the Bible because God chooses to use his family to bless the whole world. In fact, later on, the entire nation of Israel traces their roots and their family line back to Jacob and his sons. And that's kind of surprising, because he's not the kind of guy that you would expect God to build a nation through. He's not this squeaky clean Bible hero kind of guy. His name actually tells you a lot about him, because when he was born, he came out grasping onto the heel of his twin brother Esau, and his parents named him Jacob, and that name, it's connected to grabbing the heel. It's connected to scheming and manipulating, using cleverness to get ahead. That's what his name means. He's a schemer. He's a grabber, and he spends a huge portion of his life living up to his name. I'd say he spends the majority of his life living up to his name. He manipulates his brother out of the birthright. He works with his mom to deceive his father and get the family blessing. He runs away when everything blows up. He lives with his uncle, who's a schemer in his own right, and they just keep going back and forth trying to outfox each other. This guy bargains, and he calculates, and he manipulates. He works the angles. That's kind of the nature of who Jacob is. And I think a big part of what makes his story so compelling and instructive for us is because of how he changes over the years. I mean, it takes some time. Years go by and it's slow. Sometimes it's painfully slow. But what happens is you see God working in his life, and you see God changing his character, changing his identity. Eventually, he comes to this defining moment in his life where he's headed back home. He's been gone for about 20 years, and he knows that this means confronting and facing his brother, the same guy that he cheated, the same guy that's vowed to kill him. And he is afraid, and he's done what he's always done. He's planned and calculated, and he's kind of schemed up how to survive this. But then the night before he meets with his brother, he wrestles with God all night long. And by the time the night is over, God has given him a new name. God tells him, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel. And names, they matter a whole lot in this guy's story. And this is way more than God saying, you know what? Israel has a nice ring to it. That's not what's going on. This is a marker of what God is doing in his life. The grabber is changing. The schemer is changing. The guy who spent his whole life trying to control the outcome and force things to happen, that guy is slowly becoming someone who can receive from God, someone who can trust God. And it is not some clean, dividing line in his life where like he's terrible one day and then the next day he wakes up and he's got it all figured out. That is not how transformation usually works, and it did not work that way for Jacob at all. In fact, the Bible keeps calling him Jacob sometimes when he's kind of living out the old patterns. But Israel, it's a marker of what God is doing, who he's becoming. There's the Jacob we meet at the beginning, the man who's grabbing for everything he can get. And then there's this growing picture of Israel, a man who's learning that maybe, just maybe, he doesn't have to do that anymore. Jacob is trying to control. Israel is learning, I'm not in control. God's in control. That's what we've been watching all summer long. How God works in someone's life who makes mistakes and get things wrong, who has a propensity to mess up, someone who makes it harder than it has to be. And when you pull back and you look at his life as a whole, there's just two big things that we want to talk about. And the first thing is that family matters. And not that TV show on TGIF from the 90s with Carl Winslow and Steve Urkel. We're not talking about them. We're talking about our families. Our families are super important, and they matter so much, mine and yours. And I know that that might sound basic, and maybe you were hoping for some big, revelation. But what Jacob's story shows us is just how powerful a family is in shaping who we become. God designed the family to shape the next generation. Think about everything that you're supposed to learn at home. Everything we can learn at home from who came before us. Families at their best, they teach us how to love, how to handle conflict, how to process and deal with feelings and emotions. We can learn to trust. We can learn what an authentic faith looks like. Our families, they are constantly teaching us how life works. And so much of it happens without anybody saying a word. We learn by watching and listening and experiencing. This is one of the things that we talked about right up front in this series, the idea that kids don't just observe what happens in the family, they interpret it and they give it meaning. They make sense out of things, and they start to figure out who they are and what it means about people and what it means about how the world works. And that can be an incredible gift because families can pass down great things, great patterns, generosity, a strong work ethic, traditions, values. They're all kinds of blessings that we receive from the people who came before us that help equip us and prepare us, that can help enrich our lives. But there's also a problem. And it's a problem that we all have, and no one is immune from this because as far as I know, every family is made up of people. And people have problems. People are imperfect. We are all sinners. We all make mistakes. We all fall short. And this is how sin works. It ruins things. And not just out there in the world somewhere. Sin ruins things at home and our families too. We're not just talking about passing on bad habits or family preferences. We're talking about families having the ability to pass on hard, tough stuff because of our fallenness and brokenness. We don't just pass down the good stuff we want. We can also pass on the wounds and the hurts. We can pass on ways of thinking and reacting. And no one sat us down and intentionally tried to teach us, but we picked it up anyhow. And when it comes to Jacob, his family is like a neon warning light sign about how all this stuff works. Because most of his struggles, some of his lifelong struggles, they didn't start with him. Some of his biggest problems were handed to him. The Bible tells us Isaac loved Esau and Rebekah loved Jacob. In Jacob's family, dad had his guy and mom had her guy. He grew up in a family with alliances and comparison and competition, a very real struggle over who gets the love and the blessing, who's important around here. That's his family. They have favorites. His dad had a favorite. His grandfather had a favorite. Meanwhile, on mom's side, she's a manipulator. Think about this. When it comes time for Isaac, her husband, to pass on the family blessing, she's the one that cooks up the plan. She's the one that tells Jacob how to do it and helps with the disguise and comes up with the lie and the scheme that deceives her own husband, deceives her own son out of the blessing. That's mom. She Bernie Madoffed her own family. Think about this. On one side, there's a line of favoritism. And on the other side, there's a line of manipulation. And what does Jacob become? Well, he becomes both. He picks up both ways of doing things. He learned to manipulate, to lie, to deceive, to scheme. And later, when he has a family of his own, what does he do? He passes it on. He plays favorites. He has a favorite wife, a favorite son. When he thinks his favorite son has died, he mourns, and then he picks a new favorite son. We can just see the cycle at work across generations in this family, and it is always easier to pick up on the patterns in someone else's family, someone else's life, isn't it? I mean, it's easy to see that Isaac and Rebekah, they have favoritism and competition in their family, and Jacob carries it into his family, and then what happens? Well, sure enough, Jacob's sons, they pick up on it, and they carry the deception and the rivalry and the resentment and the manipulation. They carry it into the next generation. The names change, circumstances, details, they all change. But the same stories, the same issues, they just keep getting told with different names. Family histories can do that. And this is one of the biggest lessons Jacob's life teaches us. We have to understand this. We have to use this for us. Whatever we do not root out, we tend to pass on. Not all of the time, but so often what we learned just to deal with, what we didn't face, the fear, the anxiety, the unhealthy patterns of conflict, whatever we learned to put up with, if we don't let God work on that stuff in our hearts, in our souls, if we don't let God do his work in us, most of the time, we pass it on. And when we think about this, we have to be really careful in the midst of these dynamics of how families work. Because this is not an invitation to spend the rest of this Sunday blaming your parents. That is not what Jacob's story is teaching us. Our families shape us for sure, but our families, they don't get the final word on who we become. At some point, Jacob has to take responsibility for Jacob. He can't spend his whole life saying, well, dad played favorites, mom was a manipulator. This is just how it worked in my family. What am I supposed to do? All of these dynamics, they help explain who he is, but they do not excuse who he is. At some point, eventually, he has to decide, what am I going to do with what was handed to me? And so do we. We were all handed something. We have to figure out if we're going to pass it on or not. And sometimes, in the middle of the mess that makes in our lives. Sometimes you can see people get stuck, bogged down, just spinning their wheels because they want to pin their whole life on the people who came before them. And we would be wise to keep in mind our families, our parents, they were part of a family too. Acknowledging that. It doesn't excuse anything. It doesn't mean everything that happened was okay or that harm wasn't real. We don't pretend that the pain didn't happen. But it does mean that our parents and our grandparents, they're real people too. And most of our dysfunction and pain, the roots of the wounds, most of the time, they didn't start with the generation right in front of us. We'd be wise to see that something was handed to them too, and they were doing the best they could. What it comes down to is this. I have a question for us. It's like a two-sided question. I think the best thing we can do with this is to ask, what good thing was passed to me that I need to make sure and pass on? What do you need to be very intentional about passing on because it's good and life-giving and God-honoring? What good thing do you need to pass on? The other side of that question is what came to me that needs to stop with me? What have I been handed that I need to make sure and root out of my life? That's a great question to wrestle with, because when the rubber meets the road, we have two choices with all this. We can root it out or we can pass it on. We can bring what we've been handed to our Heavenly Father. We can let Him work on it and heal it and start to remake it in us. We can bring it to Him, or we can ignore it. We can look the other way. We can pretend like it's not there. You could almost view this like a choice. And the choice is to root it out or pass it on. That's what comes to us. And that is hard because it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of heart and soul work. And a lot of times God uses the Bible to show us things we never saw about ourselves. Sometimes He uses wise people in your life, people around us like a spouse or a close friend, somebody who loves Jesus and is a little bit further down the road in their faith. God will use them to help us see what we can't see on our own. Sometimes this work, it happens with a counselor. And one of the tricky things that makes it so tough, so complex with these patterns, is they feel normal because it's all we know. It's how we've lived. It's how we've grown up. And sometimes we need someone outside of that pattern to kind of shine the light for us. What we have to learn to do is to bring all of that structure and pattern, we bring it to the Lord and we ask, show me what's good here and what needs to continue. Father, show me what's broken. Show me what needs to change, what needs to stop. We bring it to Him and we listen. We make space and invite Him to work in us. It is hard, but it is worth it. And you know, as we're putting the wraps on this whole series, before we move off of this whole family idea, I just have to share one perspective that I hope that you will find encouraging. Because Jacob's family gives us tremendous hope. I mean, look at all these people. You think your family has issues? You think you have it bad? This family is crazy. They lie and cheat. They take advantage of each other. They mistreat and form alliances. You ever see that TV show Survivor? That's what this family's like. They're trying to vote each other out at tribal council every chance they get. But what happens? Don't miss what happens in their life. The good news for us is right in the middle of all that mess, God is at work. All of their brokenness and dysfunction does not eliminate them from what God wants to do in their life. He just keeps getting involved. He keeps interrupting and calling people into something better and different. If there is hope for a family as messed up as this, that means there's hope for our families too. We do not have to be prisoners of what was handed to us. Our families, they can shape who we've been, but they don't have to define who we become. By the power and work of God, a pattern can stop. A whole new way of being can grow up. And most of the time it starts with somebody just like you asking God, what got handed to me that needs to die with me? That's the first big idea. What we don't root out, we pass on. Now, the next idea, the second thing to kind of latch onto and hold on to when it comes to Jacob's life, this is probably the biggest of all. The most powerful thing that we can take away from his whole story is that God is faithful. That's what we see time and time again when we look at Jacob's story. The most amazing thing about his life, it's not his growth or transformation. It's not how much he changes. And he does change significantly. God does incredible work in his life. But the most significant thing about Jacob's life is how faithful God is to him. How incredibly persistent God is in doing exactly what he said he's going to do. He simply doesn't quit in his ability to follow through. Think about this. We talked about this earlier in the summer. Early on in Jacob's life, this is in Genesis 28. It's right after he tricked his brother, he lied to his dad, he stole the birthright, he blew up his family, and he had to run for his life. Right in the middle of that, God met him, and God spoke to him, and God made him some promises. Listen to what God promised. He said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. And check this out. Don't miss out on this, what God's telling him. Jacob has not gotten his life together. He hasn't mended anything with his family. He hasn't made things right with the people that he hurt. He has not become Israel yet. He's literally on the run from the consequences of his choices. And God shows up and says, I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. God basically said, you aren't very faithful, Jacob, but I am, and I will do what I've promised. And the rest of his life is basically the answer to one simple question. Did God do it? God said, I'll be with you. Was he? When Jacob was living with his uncle, and those two were spending 20 years trying to out-scheme and out-manipulate each other, was God with Jacob? When his uncle changed the deal and tricked him and cheated him, was God with him? Absolutely. When it was time for Jacob to head back home, did God bring him out of there? Did God bring him back to the promised land? Absolutely. When Jacob was terrified about facing Esau, when he wrestled with God all night, when he had to come face to face with the brother who promised to kill him, when his family fell apart over and over again and things got ugly and dangerous, and Jacob kept hedging and struggling and making mistakes, the question his life asks is, did God do what he said he would do 100%? Yes, every single time, without fail. More consistent than death or taxes. God did exactly what he said he would do. He is faithful all the time, and you can trust him no matter what. This is a struggle for us, just like it was for Jacob, especially in our culture. In our day, distrust has become so rampant. We distrust in institutions and our political leaders and the media, and so much of it is earned, right? But we take that distrust and we transpose it on God. If I can't trust all this stuff I can see, how am I supposed to trust God? That is exactly what's going on in Jacob's life. And it plays out to this belief that he develops. He believes if he's going to be successful, if he's going to make it, if it's going to happen, Jacob has to make it happen. Jacob has to take care of Jacob. And don't miss the irony. Almost everything Jacob devotes his life to grabbing for himself, God's already promised to give him. The blessing, the family, prosperity, protection, a future, a place to belong. He keeps grabbing and grabbing what God's already promised he's going to do in his life. He is surrounded by the promises and blessings of God, and he has such a hard time trusting the God who made them. the God who is blessing him. But at every twist and turn, God just won't stop working. Do I trust God to do what he says he'll do? That's the question of his life, and it's the question of our lives too. Do I trust God to take care of me, or do I have to take care of me? Do I have to be the one in control? Do I have to grab this so somebody else doesn't get it? You know, in our lives, it's not about birthrights and disguises to trick our brother. It's not about dividing up herds to kind of hedge and manipulate the situation. But we know exactly what it's like to think like Jacob thought. If I don't make this happen, no one will. If I don't hold this together, well, then it'll all fall apart. It all depends on me. If I don't look out for me, no one will. And in the midst of those very real tensions in our lives, Jacob's life is this incredible invitation to see what happens if you let go and learn to trust and depend on the incredible faithfulness of God. Because God keeps proving himself faithful even when Jacob isn't. Stop and think about this for a minute. Put yourself in Jacob's shoes here. Because God's faithfulness, it's not just for Jacob. His character and his faithfulness, it's for us too. And it doesn't always show up as protection and provision. Over and over again, God's faithfulness overwhelms Jacob with grace he never saw coming. He keeps finding himself in times of his life where he has every reason to expect something or someone's about to get him. Moments where it is about to all come crashing down, and instead God's grace finds them. That's one thing I love about this whole story. He keeps expecting consequences, and he keeps being lavished with the faithful, unexpected grace of God. God's faithfulness and grace there are on such powerful display in his life. And that does not mean there aren't consequences for his choices. We've seen this over and over. There's plenty of consequences. So many of his mistakes cost him so dearly, and they damages his family. He lives with heartbreak and regret, but in the middle of it all, grace keeps finding him. And when we step back and look at this, I think what we walk away with is this is not the story of a bad guy who becomes a good guy. It's not the story of someone figuring it all out and getting their act together. It's not this feel-good story with a nice, neat bow on it of a deeply flawed person that finally figures out how to pull all the right levers and heal themselves. His story is remarkable because God is the hero. God is the one who pursues and speaks and protects, who provides for him. God is the one who changes a life, who brings a lost son home, who restores what looked like it was lost forever. God is the one who upholds the promise, not Jacob. God is the hero of the story. And that, CCC, is such good news for us because we are people who don't have our families figured out either. We are people who keep repeating the same patterns, who struggle to trust God, who grasp for control. We are just like Jacob. We are people that find ways to make it harder than it has to be. And what a gift to have his story that shows there is hope for people like us. Because we aren't the hero of our story either. God is the hero. Is he the hero of your story? Are you living in a way where it is just so clear it's not about me? It's not about what I can do. It's not about what I can take care of. It's about him. He's the one. I defer to him. I honor him. I give myself to him. I look to him. If God says it, I believe it, and I work to do it. If God says to care about it, I make it more important in my life. If God says not to do it, I do the hard work of letting it go. Does the trajectory of your life tell a story where it's blatantly clear to the people you know and love and come across, God is the main character? He is the one. I hope we will choose that life. that path. It's what Jacob's life teaches us more than anything else. God is the hero. And the sooner we jump on board with what he's trying to do, the better it is for everybody. And you know, we have something that Jacob never had. We have Jesus to look at, to see just how amazingly good God is. We have the cross, where God showed us the depth of his love for us. We have the sacrifice of Jesus to show Jesus is the hero, not just of my personal story, of all the stories, of the story. It all points to him and what he did for us through his death, burial, and resurrection. We're going to have some time to reflect on Jesus and remember that who we are is not just because of him, but it's also in response to him. We'll spend some time celebrating communion and remembering, maybe for the first time, maybe for the 100th time, my life isn't about me. I want to reorient. I want my life to be about and response to. I want my life to be in light of him, because Jesus is the hero of the story. Let's celebrate communion together.